Hey everybody, welcome and good afternoon. I'm Christy Zappi-Ferradino, Program Director at NDIA, and I'm so excited to have you on this call this afternoon with some of my colleagues. This is a really great day for us to talk about this amazing funding opportunity. So we're going to let people continue to roll on in, but we're going to get started. So what I wanted to do first is to ask you all to make sure that you go ahead and put your name, your organization, and where you are in the chat so we can see everybody. I'm already seeing lots of friends and familiar faces in the chat. So welcome, and it's great to see you. And shout out to one of the people who has the cherry blossoms in the background. So thank you for doing that. So today I am joined by two of my colleagues, Paula Balboa and Abby Waldrop, who you're going to hear from later this session. You'll get to see them if you haven't gotten to meet with them already. So the thing that I want to talk about today that's going to be on the next slide is just a little bit of information about the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and to also talk about what we're going to be discussing today. So in general, I'm going to give you just a quick overview of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, some information on digital inclusion, how we define it, how it's defined within our community. Then Paulo is going to talk about the Digital Navigator program that was designed by the field for the field, using information and on the ground work by our programs, partners, and affiliates. And then I'm going to flip it over to Abby, who's going to talk about this amazing funding opportunity for the National Digital Navigator Corps. And then we'll have time for Q&A. I do want to say too, super quick, that this is one of two informational webinars that we're going to be doing. Later in April, we're going to post the request for proposals for this funding opportunity. So once that goes up and you can see what the RFP is asking and more information, we'll have that additional webinar so you can ask more detailed questions about the funding opportunity and the expectations and the timeline, etc. So I'm excited to share with you this one slide that is a new slide for us that talks about the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, our mission and vision. This is a new slide for us. We have been around for about 6 years and we are growing and evolving like everybody. So our mission is really to advance digital equity by supporting community programs and equipping policymakers to act. We consider ourselves a bridge to policymakers and the community, so we're here to serve you and to work with you. We are your community. Our vision is to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to use technology to live, learn, work, and thrive. So that's our mission and vision. You should see that updated on our website very soon, and it coincides with our new strategic plan that was just announced within our listserv with the 6 weeks ago or so. So the next slide that I want to walk you through super quick, I believe, is I'm going to talk about the definitions, but just for those of you who are new to our community, welcome. But we are 650 affiliates strong, growing every day. We have members, partners, affiliates in 46 states, plus DC and the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, which we need to add to that. You see our staff here. We've also grown from about 4, in the beginning it was about 2 staff people. When I came on, I think I was number 8, and now we are 17 strong team members. The other thing I want to mention is our community is open to everybody. So we do have a tiered approach where you could join. There's a paid version, but there's also a free version. If you join us through the free version, you have access to our community calls, which are 1-hour calls every 3rd Friday of the month. And we have some really fabulous speakers from our community talking about what's going on in their community. And then we also bring the national and federal perspective of what's going on. We just had a lot of conversations around ACP. There's also a tremendously active listserv for our affiliates and friends. And for many of you who are friends of ours on the call, you know there's a lot of wealth of information on there. So consider joining us. Also, all of our events are on our website, which is digitalinclusion.org/events. So I welcome you to join in or refer people to our Digital Inclusion 101s or our ACP webinar. We did one about the Infrastructure Act, things like that. The next slide I want to talk about is definitions, I believe. Yes. Okay. So our work is really focused to get to digital equity, but we do that through digital inclusion. So digital inclusion are all the activities necessary to ensure that all individuals and communities have access to information and communication technologies, and that could be broadband, personal devices, digital literacy skills. Once we have those, we are able to get to the goal, which is digital equity, which makes sure that everybody has access to these critical resources to ensure that they can have full participation in our society, democracy, and economy, and that they're fully able to participate. So with that, I think I'm going to flip it over to Paolo, who is going to walk through the model for digital navigators. And although many of you have been running digital navigator programs or are interested or have been part of our digital navigators working group, for some of our new people who are just learning about this model and this funding opportunity, we want to just provide a little bit more information about the model and how it works to give you some context. So with that, I'm going to flip it over to Paolo.
Thanks, Christy. Hi, good afternoon or good morning to everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces on here. For those of you who are new to me, who don't know me, my name is Paolo Balboa. I'm the Senior Program and Data Manager with NDIA. My background is in public libraries, which very much informs how we designed and built out the Digital Navigator program. Over the next few minutes, I'm just going to be describing what Digital Navigators is, how it came to be, and how it works before sending it over to Abby, who will describe some of the specifics about this new and exciting iteration of Digital Navigators. So just as a temperature read in the chat, I do see several familiar faces on this call, but I do see several faces who I don't recognize. So if you could in the chat, I'm just curious, let me know or let us know if you are running a Digital Navigator programs. I hear my audio is popping, sorry. Quick second.
Okay, how is this? Can I get a thumbs up? I gotta get new AirPods. Every like 5th call, I get a ton of people who are doing what just happened now, and they're just like, your audio is bad. I'm like, oh crap, okay. So anyway, let me know in the chat if you are familiar with Digital Navigators, if you are a part of a Digital Navigator program locally. I know several of you are, but I'm also curious to see how many people don't know what Digital Navigators is. As Christy was mentioning, our field is constantly growing and we're always welcoming new organizations and individuals into our community. So I'm just gonna take some time to let you all know what Digital Navigators is, how it works. For those of you who have heard the spiel before, get a cup of coffee, drink some tea. So Digital Navigators as a program was born out of the model under which NDIA likes to operate. Everything that we do, as Christy was mentioning a few slides ago, everything that we do is informed by talking with our network of affiliates. Our affiliates are experts, advocates, researchers who are doing the work on the ground of digital literacy, research, broadband access. We talk with folks who are doing this work and we synthesize and try to understand what is working and what's not working to produce tools, trends, best practices for the rest of the field. We've produced other types of materials like the Digital Inclusion Startup Manual. We've just recently revised the Coalition Guidebook, all of which are available on our website. Those are examples of other iterations of our work with our community. Digital Navigators is no different. We will take no credit for inventing Digital Navigators. Rather, all the credit goes to our community of experts who helped build this program into what it is today. Digital Navigators, so we can go to the next slide. Digital Navigators is a program that stacks these services under one role, under one person. Frequently in the digital inclusion, digital equity world, you'll hear myself, my colleagues, other folks use this analogy of the 3 legs of the stool. The 3 legs of the stool are those activities necessary in a digital inclusion program to get our communities to a framework of digital equity. That slide a few moments ago that Christy was talking about, digital equity and digital inclusion. We want people to get to a framework of digital equity, but we know that programs like Digital Navigators exist because we have to get people there. The populations that are historically left behind and underserved are the populations in most need, and those are the folks who we're trying to help. So we're talking about stacking each of these legs of the stool into one service, into one program. Digital Navigators builds upon that person-to-person interaction that takes place in an organization like a public library that offers digital literacy classes, maybe a social service organization that works with community members like migrants or refugees to help them to get them connected with workforce opportunities. Any sort of organization, probably like yours, that connects with community members and that realizes, probably in COVID, that internet access is a huge part of that. That's the type of work that we're talking about with Digital Navigators. Pre-COVID, a place like a public library, and I know this from firsthand experience because it's the world that I came from, pre-COVID, a place like a public library simply offered your regular computer basics class a few times a month. Maybe then that track would be, we would follow along people and say, okay, there's now a Microsoft Word class coming down the line. There's an email class, right? There are these one-touch support services that places like a social service agency or a public library offers. But what Digital Navigator does is build upon those existing programs and services to include these other legs of the stool that you see here. So we're making sure that folks are aware of available affordable broadband options. Christy mentioned the Affordable Connectivity Program, which was signed into law by the president last November. A very exciting win for our community. The Affordable Connectivity Program was built upon a previous program called the Emergency Broadband Benefit. So getting not only ourselves, right, as the practitioners, but getting Digital Navigators and then further community members to understand the nuances of, sometimes these the quagmire of federal benefits, which is admittedly hard to understand, right? It's hard to wrap your head around it. So getting folks to understand that these benefits exist and that the community members that we're working with are eligible and able to get these benefits, that's a huge part of Digital Navigators. Further, there's also this other leg of the stool for appropriate devices. I just like to talk about appropriate devices by offering an example, right? When I was working at the public library, if someone came in through the help desk and they were asking for help applying for a job, for instance, my first question would be, okay, can we get into your email, right? That's going to be one of the first questions that is going to be useful for me to take them on that step. If I see that they have a smartphone, then I'm thinking a few steps ahead and I'm thinking, okay, eventually we're going to have to upload some sort of document, maybe attach it to an email, attach it to an online form. That process is so much more difficult on a smartphone than it should be, right? If I'm doing that same process on a laptop or a desktop, that's an issue or an example of an appropriate or maybe inappropriate device. This last piece, digital literacy trainings, that's that person-to-person touch, that person-to-person interaction that I think a lot of folks on this call, our organizations already kind of offer. We're just building upon those one-touch training opportunities to let people know that there are other components to this work that we call digital equity. So on the next slide, we have defined, with the collective effort of our community members and our affiliates, to define what a digital navigator is, who they are. A digital navigator is a trusted guide. Break this down piece by piece. It's a trusted guide. It's a person, right? It's not a program. It's an actual human being that a community member can look to, call, and ideally trust with walking them through some sticky pieces online. They address the whole digital inclusion process. And you see broken down here, those three legs of the stool: connectivity, devices, and digital skills with community members. And key here is through repeated interactions, right? A digital navigator may have just a one-off interaction with a community member, because that may be all a community member needs. But typically what we've seen in previous iterations of digital navigator programs is that the community member comes back. That's great, right? Because the community member, they may be someone living in an assisted living home. They may be living alone. Maybe they don't have a friend or a family member who they're living with that they can call on to help out with these sort of technical questions on the internet. So who can they call? Typically, this has been a person like a public library worker, or it's been a community-based organization worker who works with some sort of component of their life, like workforce development or housing. So on the next slide, we can talk about what a digital navigator does. When we were building out the digital navigator program, one of the questions that myself and my colleagues frequently got is a question trying to tie down exactly who a digital navigator is. And this was useful for us because it helped us get better at describing this program and what it is. So a digital navigator is less of an Apple genius or a Geek Squad person, right? In the first few iterations of digital navigators, folks were asking us, like, should I be looking for someone with a computer science background? Which, yes and no, but I would lean more no. Like, it's not that technical. It's great, like, learning how to build a front end website and understanding how Python works is super awesome, but that's less of the type of skill set we're looking for within a digital navigator. We're looking rather closer to someone who has an empathy-based background. So, places like a social work school, of course, a librarian, someone with cultural competency who has that patience and that really, truly that empathy to be able to sit with a community member, a customer, a patron, and be able to figure out with them what exactly the technology related question is and how they can best address solving that. I brought up librarians quite a few times already in my brief part so far, but that's just because the librarians were a huge part of the working group that helped create and define what digital navigators is. I think about, and this may be new for some people, in the library world, in my library program, and I think most others, we talked about this idea of a reference interview. The reference interview refers to this scenario, the situation in which a librarian is sitting behind the reference desk, a library patron walks through the doors, and they ask a very vague question. Sometimes the library patron doesn't know how to phrase their question. They might not have the vocabulary to describe what they're looking for. So my example from the library world is that a patron comes into the door and says, I'm looking for a book. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know what the title is, but I know that the cover is red. And I'm sitting there, right? Empathy pops into my head, patience pops into my head. I can't just be like, well, like, you got to tell me more, because it's a service job. I have to help. I'm tasked with helping them getting to the resource that they need. And I have a computer in front of me with a database of books that my library system holds. So I have the resources available to search. I just have to have that conversation with someone and ask them in an interview, effectively, some unobtrusive, open-ended questions that allow us to have a conversation so that I can more gracefully get them to the resources that they're aware of. So maybe I can ask something like, okay, do you know when it was written? Do you know if do you know what the book is about? Do you know if it's a fiction book, a nonfiction book, right? These sort of open-ended questions that allow a more organic conversation to happen. In digital navigators, we translate that interaction to focus more specifically on technology needs of community members, library patrons, and customers. So if someone says, I need help applying for a job, I have to rewind to the very, very beginning, the very first touch point, let's say, and ask, do you have an email? Right? Because that's typically going to be the first step in the process of applying for a job. And then someone might say, I have an email, but I forgot my password. That's step one, right? That's the very, very first thing before we even get to the job, right? So it's a matter of me walking with someone through their technology related question, and in the most unobtrusive way, getting them to the resource or getting them to solve the problem that they have. So on the next slide, we can talk about what the hiring process looks like. Again, this builds upon who a digital navigator is. A coworker or a colleague who's on the call can drop in the template version of the job description in the chat. You can find this job description on our website, on the Digital Navigator website. But this baseline job description is a template that the working group, our Digital Navigator working group, developed collaboratively, right? It's now available on our Digital Navigator webpage. The job description really serves as a touch point for individuals and organizations to shape their understanding of who and what a digital navigator is, and what what those required key competencies are. So we're looking for a background in something like social work or public librarianship. We're looking for that patient and cultural competency. Of course, if they have a background in technology support, that's a bonus. That is super, that's amazing, because that will certainly come into play into the type of work that a digital navigator does. But the descriptions list, and you'll see this if you have time to look through the resource later on. We have a list of critical skills and aptitudes for the digital navigator. And those critical skills and aptitudes really reflect the collective expertise and background of the working group. So we're taking like all of these personalities that came in and helped us mold this program into describing what a digital navigator really does, and what is useful for them to know. So we are looking for an understanding of basic technological concepts, right? A question that comes up now and then is, how far does a digital navigator take someone, right? A digital navigator is someone who is aware of existing, usually free resources. Maybe their organization already does offer some sort of digital literacy training class, or maybe there's someone on staff who is more aware or more familiar with certain applications. Or a digital navigator is someone who, with the assistance of NDIA training, becomes aware of free digital literacy resources like Learn Free from the Goodwill Community Foundation, or the Public Library Association's Digital Learn. These are resources that a digital navigator can point someone to, not necessarily teach them, right? If a digital navigator can assess that a community member or customer has the wherewithal and the computer expertise to be able to navigate the internet on their own, that's great. And a digital navigator can say, okay, I think that you're ready to check out these websites here that have specific topics, specific applications that may be suitable for what the community member is seeking. If in the case, and this more often than not is the case, if in the case a digital navigator assesses a community member and they say, okay, I don't think that you're ready to step into this world on your own, then the digital navigator has that patience, the time, the empathy to sit with a community member to get them set up. Maybe it's basic mouse clicking skills, maybe it's typing skills. Maybe, and just maybe, the community member already knows how to do these things, but they're just not confident enough to do this on their own. That's where a digital navigator steps in, and really building up that confidence and understanding for what the internet is and how to get around it. So on the next slide, we have an example of what a typical digital navigator process, or what a typical interaction looks like. So to just walk you through like what a real world example would look like, say a digital navigator, and I'm just going to go off on a public library example again. Say a digital navigator is someone who is working at a public library. A community member or library patron calls or walks through the doors and says, I'm calling because I need help, applying for a job. The digital navigator will first assess their need. In other words, they're going to have that reference interview, that organic conversation in which they're asking the community member or library patron, okay, why are you coming in today, right? Like, where are you in your experience and understanding and confidence of using the internet? You can't just ask someone, are you comfortable using the internet? Because most people, including myself, are going to overshoot our own expertise and say, I'm an expert. I'm so good at using the internet, I don't need any help. So NDIA, with our community, has designed several intake forms that sort of ask around computer use, internet use. We ask questions like, do you use the internet to connect with family and friends? Do you use the internet to research about events in your community? And we measure those on what's called a Likert scale, right? Strongly disagree to strongly agree, for the digital navigator to figure out where the community member is in their understanding and comfort with technology. From there, the digital navigator can move on to the next step where they can evaluate and discuss what the best path forward is for the community member. Maybe it will turn out that the community member is coming into the place like a public library because their internet at home isn't very reliable or it's a little bit too slow. Maybe in an age of COVID, they have 4 other people in their household who are trying to use the internet at the same time, and it's simply too slow for them to be able to use the internet the way they would like to use it. So then we can talk about some affordable broadband options for them, right? That's that referring to relevant resources here. Afterwards, and this is where we're looking at those 3 areas of need, the digital navigators figuring out, is this a device question? Is it a skills training question? Is it a connectivity question? Is it all of the above or a few of these at the same time, which usually it can be. And the digital navigator typically will check in and evaluate their progress. So one of the things that we're really excited about this particular program is that because it takes place over 31 months, I believe, of direct service, we're able to continue to check in with the communities that we're working with to be able to track and potentially measure if there is any, improvement in someone's digital skills growth or their understanding of privacy and security online, right? These more sort of ethereal concepts that we would all like to measure, but have found it difficult to measure. That's one of the things that we're really excited about getting this particular program off the ground, because it does take place over 2.5 years. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what the training involves, or what is involved with the training that NDIA offers. So the training, the total content is flexible, but we've been landing on doing a training that lands on 6 to 8 hours of training over the course of a week. So usually we're breaking down the training, we're always flexible and working with sites depending on what works best for them and schedules, but usually the training takes place over the course of 4 days, 90 minutes each day. We emphasize interactivity in the training because we know that in the Digital Navigator program, the cohort is going to learn from itself, right? As questions and unique problems arise within distinct populations, the cohort itself is going to be best suited to help address its own questions. NDIA is there to sort of guide the conversation and to make sure that we're all staying on the right track. But this is very much a community-led program. So of the training, there are several learning objectives, one of which is that the trainees will understand and recognize what digital inclusion is and how those activities support building digital equity in their fields and respective communities. That's what we're that's the overarching goal of the training. So that's what we're really pinning down on the orientation piece. We're also making sure that trainees are equipped with resources to access local information to address digital inclusion holistically. Holistically meaning that we're addressing those 3 legs of the stool for the folks that we're working with. So that's, again, connectivity, devices, and digital literacy training. Finally, we're making sure that trainees are equipped with skills and best practices around conducting items like the reference interview through those survey forms, and that trainees are also upskilled to use some free data tools like the i3 Connectivity Explorer and the census data tool, so that they are able to do and conduct their own analyses of their of the digital inclusion needs of their community. On the next slide, we can talk about what evaluation has looked like in previous iterations of the Digital Navigator program. The one, and I'll put this in the chat here. This is a screenshot taken from a Tableau dashboard that we collaborated with the Salt Lake City Public Library to develop at the end of their program. All of this information and more was taken from data gathered through those intake forms. So on those intake forms, digital navigators were asking folks questions like where, in this case, Salt Lake City, they were asking, where are you calling from? And we broke that down by zip code, recognizing that privacy is a huge concern. We wanted to map this geographically, but also make sure that we were respecting, personally identifiable information. So we broke it down by zip code. And then we were, of course, asking what type of technology need is this interaction about? This is for the digital navigator to fill out on behalf of the community member. Of course, we were breaking down those technology needs by those 3 legs of the stool. So was this a device question? Was this a connectivity question? Was it a digital literacy question? Beyond all of these great, types of data that we were collecting, these quantitative data that showed us the counts of how many people were calling in and what types of issues we were calling in. We also need to recognize that digital navigators, because it's such a human-centered program, we also needed to collect other types of data, qualitative data based on interviews, feedback, reactions that community members and library patrons had after in the course of this particular program, after the course of working with their digital navigator for 9 to 10 months. So we were able to gather like those really strong impact quotes, those valuable pieces of information that can't be quantified into numbers, but rather are arguably more meaningful than a count in an overall program. So on the next slide, I'll just begin to wrap up my portion of today's presentation by just talking about the different types of lives digital navigators has lived over the course of the past 1.5 years since we started supporting sites delivering digital navigators. Digital navigators was always designed to be iterative and flexible and adaptive according to the needs and according to the unique needs of an organization that's taking it on. So digital navigators has lived in places like public libraries. Of course, I've been jabbering about public libraries for so long. So a public library is a natural place for a digital navigator to live. But also, digital navigators has lived in municipalities. In the city of Philadelphia, there were several digital navigator working group members who were a part of that working group who were from the city of Philadelphia. The model for that particular program is that, interestingly, the city of Philadelphia worked with the city's 311 information line to field any sort of technology-related questions that were then funneled to the appropriate digital navigator to help them, sort out their need with a community member. Also, another type of digital navigator program has lived with the Rural LISC, has lived with Rural LISC, which is the Local Initiative Support Corporation. Since September 2020, we, NDIA, have worked with Rural LISC to work with 3 different cohorts. Those cohorts have been made up of 32 community action agencies in 20 states across Appalachia, the Deep South, the upper Midwest, and the Navajo Nation. For the Rural LISC program, each of those community action agencies have had an emphasis or a focus specifically on economic development. So that's been one sort of like really pinned down version of what digital navigators can look like. Before I wrap it up and send it over to my coworker, Abby, I'll just close on this example of Rural LISC by mentioning that Rural LISC, for our part, NDIA, is currently the only type of digital navigator program that we've worked with that has a focus on rural and tribal areas in the US. As Abby's going to mention, we're trying to really learn more and expand our understanding of the needs and the focuses of tribal and rural areas, because we know from our part as the national organization that there's a lack of information, there's a lack of understanding on our part, and we fully admit that, and that's something that we're really excited to dig into with this particular program. So I'll send it over to Abby, who's going to talk about, after all this background, Abby's going to talk about what we're here for today and what the National Digital Navigator Corps is. Abby?
Thanks, Paulo. And this is your moment if you did go get a cup of coffee because you're well familiar with the model. We are going to talk now about the National Digital Navigator Corps. And it's a really exciting new opportunity for organizations that are serving rural and tribal lands to establish a digital navigator as part of a national cohort. This work is funded by google.org, and it's going to be supported with a great partnership with Ameren Critical Infrastructure. And as Paulo mentioned, with this focus on tribal and rural areas, we can gather more best practices about these specific types of communities and create a community of practice among the programs so that they can support one another. It's with a multi-year investment and intentional training from us and support from us at NDIA, as well as our partners and affiliates. We expect this project to build the long-term capacity for digital inclusion work at the local level where these communities are based. These digital navigators will be prepared to be the digital inclusion experts that are deeply embedded in their communities by the end of the programs. So just a few details about this program and this grant opportunity. It's funded again by google.org with $10 million, and that will fund 18 rural or tribal communities that will be selected to participate. And we expect that thousands of people will be impacted through the one-on-one technology training and outreach that we provided by these digital navigators. It will expand our understanding of the digital navigator model in rural and tribal communities, and Ameren Critical Infrastructure will be a key partner, especially for those tribal communities. The grant amounts will depend on each location, but the grant will provide for funding for a full-time digital navigator for 31 months, funding and support for the program manager and data manager at each host site, staff training and support from us at NDIA, including a pre-conference at our next Net Inclusion Conference, peer learning with other digital navigators, specifically in tribal and rural areas, mentorship for digital navigators from local and regional digital inclusion practitioners in our community, support for local data collection and analysis, as well as the support that tribal communities will receive from Ameren Critical Infrastructure. Community-based organizations that serve rural and tribal communities are eligible to apply for this grant opportunity. So a few examples of community-based organizations are social service agencies, libraries, health clinics, but the definitions of rural and tribal are a little more in depth. So let me give you a slide on each of those. We are using the US Census definition of rural, which is any population, housing, or territory that's not urban, as defined by urbanized areas and urban clusters. So you can take a look at that to see how that applies to you. And for the tribal lands definition, Ameren Critical Infrastructure has advised us to begin with the FCC outline of tribal lands that are eligible for their programs, but we do wish to expand this definition to include additional areas such as off-reservation tribal trust lands. And another important clarification to make is that these tribal lands do not necessarily need to be rural to qualify for this program, as long as they are considered tribal. There is some flexibility, so if you have questions about whether your specific organization would qualify as serving tribal lands, don't hesitate to reach out and we can have a discussion about that. So the next steps for this project are to sign up for updates, because we will be sending out updates soon about a second information session that will be held in April with some more of the details about the RFP project or process. And the application period will open in late April. So you should expect to get updates about that if you sign up for those updates. In June, 18 selected host sites will be notified, and then we'll have a kickoff in July to begin planning this program and providing service directly to your communities later this year. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to our support email address there, and we'll be glad to answer them. But we also have lots of time for questions right now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you all have questions about the grant program, go ahead and put them in the chat and we will provide the answers that we can today. Paulo and Chrissy, have you seen any questions in the chat to start with?
Yes, so I'm going back and forth about eligible communities, specifically extension offices that serve rural communities. Yes, so if it's a university and the extension office is serving rural or tribal communities, yes, you are eligible to apply. The whole point of this RFP is to reach people in rural and tribal communities who historically have not had access to these types of resources and supports.
Yeah, and I can sort of take combining Helen and James's questions. You know, a lot of these eligibility questions are really come down to if your organization, right, if you're asking on your behalf or asking on behalf of someone else, if the organization serves rural or tribal communities, then it is eligible. Like the physical location is less important. So I think this might actually also get to Leslie's question, right, about that the university itself is based in like a big city, but the extension is in rural or tribal areas. The focus, eligible organizations are organizations that serve rural and tribal. So hoping to wrap in a lot of hanging questions into that.
And we will make sure that the presentation and the PowerPoint deck is on the website, specifically the page for the National Digital Navigator Corps. And then to answer Lisa's question, is the grant period 31 months? The grant period is actually longer. The term of service for the digital navigators is 31 months. So the plan right now is to release the RFP in April. You'll have about 4 to 6 weeks to submit review your application and submit it. We will have an informational webinar during that application period. Then we have an independent advisory board who will review all of those applications and score them based on a rubric that you will have access to so you can see what we're looking for. We will announce who those host sites are around June. And then we will kick off an informational meeting, like a kickoff meeting with all of those grantees in July, giving those 18 host organizations a couple of months to ramp up, meaning recruit their digital navigators, get everybody on board in their organization, receive training from us, with the intention that those digital navigation services go live in November. Because we also want to make sure, obviously those digital navigators are trained. We want to make sure too that we're working with these host sites to get the messages out about this digital navigation service to their community. Because as many of you who do run DN programs know, word of mouth is critical. And that's why it's super important for this program and for all DN programs that we have that trusted resource in the community that's offering those services. So again, to answer the question, it's a multi-year grant, but the digital navigation services is a 31-month commitment. There were a lot more questions that came up as I was speaking. So Abby or Apollo, feel free to send it our way.
There was a question about the name of the program, so I pasted that into the chat in case you wanted to copy it, but we're calling it the National Digital Navigator Corps. There's a question about per capita income associated with the rural definition, and I believe it is just population density.
Correct.
Can a state library division or state Indian Affairs division apply? Christy, do you want to take that, or do you want me to?
I believe that you can, yes, you can apply, but again, the service population for those digital navigation services must be people from a rural or tribal community. Now, I did receive an offline question a couple of days ago from somebody who is within a state library who wants to serve a rural community, but they're in a city library, but no, wait, a county library, thank you, a county library, and the county serves rural and urban communities. So would they still be eligible? Yes, they would still be eligible to apply because they're going to be serving a rural concentration. Now, obviously, we want that digital navigator to specifically focus on those rural community members or tribal community members, knowing that there might be some additional questions that come in from urban centers, but the main goal is to reach these rural and tribal communities.
I do think we want to focus on a specific community, so I don't believe that this would be like a digital navigator that cover all rural areas in the state. I don't think that is the way this program is designed. So it would be for a specific community. There are a couple questions about what would be eligible expenses for the grant, for example, tech support or ticketing systems. And I know, first of all, that there will be more details about what a budget would look like and what will be included for our next webinar that we have coming up. But I think somebody checked me on this, that would be eligible.
That would be eligible, but one thing to note, since this is a national digital navigator core and we NDIA want to have access to all the information to do an evaluation, work with another independent partners to the evaluation, we would like all the information to go through one system so we can roll it up. The budget for this RFP will also include the training. It will include the digital navigator to come to NDIA's net inclusion and pre-conference for net inclusion. It will include some support, financial support for somebody to be trained around data collection and analysis at the host organization, and a small amount of funding to cover like a program director or program manager who's helping to oversee and implement this program. It also includes, let me check that before I say that. I believe it includes money for devices, but let me just double check that.
While you're checking, I'll answer. And oh, Paulo, I saw you unmuted. Did you have something to add?
No, it does. It includes money for devices.
Thank you. Thank you. To be honest, we wrote this proposal many moons ago, and it's gone through many iterations, and I have the budget right here, but I just want to make sure. And that's the thing too, like when we announce on the website in April what the RFP looks like, we'll have more details on that grant award, what the actual ranges are. We want to make sure too that, here's the example, we set a specific amount of money aside for salary and fringe for the digital navigator, but depending on where this person is, we want to make sure that that salary is comparable to that region, to that area, to that organization. We wouldn't want somebody making a non-living wage or making a wage that's incredibly high. So more information on that for sure. But definitely as we're talking to you and you come up with more questions, please send it to that DigNav email or to Abby, because then we will be able to answer those questions for everybody in the April webinar, and also update an FAQ doc that'll be on the website.
There's a question if this program is in person and distance learning. And I'll say generally digital navigators have used different models, but this is a place-based program. So we expect there to be some in-person support, but keeping in mind that for various reasons, sometimes things are not able to be in person, and they'll are able to provide the service remotely as necessary. But it is based in a single place, so they will be serving in a certain area.
And then one question from Anthony about more grants in the future. This is the largest investment that Google.org has made in the digital inclusion space. And most of this $10 million is going out to these host organizations to support the digital navigator model within that community. I don't anticipate, because it is a multi-year grant, it's to be determined if there will be another opportunity. I don't know. But right now we want to definitely maximize as much as we can with this fabulous opportunity we've been given.
Quincy asks, has anyone discussed inclusion of state recognized tribal communities? Yeah, it is something that we have discussed. And if you have a specific scenario or an area in mind, just email us and we'll talk about it.
And then there's one other question I wanted to mention about Amarant. So Amarant is our key partner who is going to be hiring somebody who is going to be responsible to work with the 6 host organizations. It's a minimum of 6 that are in tribal communities. So we'll be working with them very closely. So I'm sure some of you who work with tribal communities are well, in partnership with them. So we're really excited about that. And we anticipate that person also doing a lot of work with our community to learn more about digital inclusion and more about the model. But they'll be pretty much the voice of the digital navigator model for those communities. Paula, do you want to answer Nick's question? Is there a shared technical database warehouse system that we have to feed with the evidence based on data, or is it housed in our own?
Yeah, that's a good question, Nick. So we're looking at NDIA to be managing the data over the course of this program, but each site, the digital navigator themselves and relevant supervisor will have access to that same sort of backend technical database. Right now we're looking with HubSpot, but we are intending to share that with all the program leads one of the things with this program that we're really excited about is making as much of the data and methodology as transparent as possible. We'll be swiping any personally identifiable information, but we want to make this a replicable program to continue this sort of work. Thanks for asking.
Thank you. Just real quick. So Google didn't put any requirements on that?
No roadblocks. No, I mean, they've been great partners with us on this, and just like recognizing that we and our community, right? We have the expertise, so they've just been sort of letting us lead on this and to guide what the program looks like.
And I should say too, just to add to our partnership with google.org, our grant officer was at Net Inclusion. So if you were at Net Inclusion, it was their first time coming to a Net Inclusion event, and they were completely wowed by the work that you all are doing and by the sense of community and support and engagement, like, truth be told, awestruck. So that was a really fabulous kind of underpinning to increase the support and the relationship. So thank you for that.
A question about the number of digital navigators for each host site. There's funding for one full-time digital navigator at each location. And I know you may have heard of programs that have many more than a single digital navigator, but those are often part-time or people who are doing other responsibilities or possibly volunteers. So that it's a little difficult to compare a single full-time person to that model. Do we have to be an affiliate of NDIA to get digital navigator training to our program? I don't think that's written anywhere, but we'd love to have you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it's not a requirement, but I mean, I will say that for your own, I mean, this is a plug for us, of course, but it also like benefits you to join the community to learn more about how other people are doing this program as well. So it's free, but it's not a requirement.
Oh. And if that's a question about digital navigators more generally, a lot of the resources that Paulo mentioned are freely available on our website, and you don't even have to call us to use them. So if that's what you're looking at rather than this grant program, you can definitely take those.
Sure. I recently joined NDIA, so I'm sorry if I have some basic questions coming up.
Not at all. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So let me ask the other question. Hold on, it's a little bit higher in the chat about partners. So we want one host organization to apply, but in the application or the proposal, we will ask you what community partners you have to see how you're able to get word of mouth out about this program with trusted organizations embedded in those communities.
There's a question about specific software or websites for digital literacy training, and most digital navigator programs refer to a variety of resources that exist, and there's none that are determined as a specific one that'll be used for this program.
Okay, and then to answer Nick's question, the funding is for a little bit of everything that you asked for in your chat question. The funding is for one digital navigator position over 31 months, some funding to support the program manager or director in implementing the program, and some funding to support somebody to do the work around data collection and analysis. Now, all of that data will be rolled up, and Paulo will be working with you on that. But we want to make sure that when we say, hey, where are the intake forms, where are the exit forms, or we don't see things being entered, you need to speak with your digital navigator to make sure, do they have questions, like what's going on, that we're actually able to support the capacity of having those staff positions or staff responsibilities in operation in your organization. I feel like we've missed a question. So if we did, if you wouldn't mind.
Still
raising their
working my
hand.
way down the list of them.
Yeah, raise your hand or definitely email Abby or the DigNav support. Adele.
Hi. I wanted to know if K-12 adult schools that like have resource centers would be able to apply. If we serve, you know, large populations that are rural.
If it's a host, you would, so I guess maybe the county school district or the school district would be the host organization, then yes. But it must serve rural.
I asked this coming from a weird place because I'm in San Bernardino County. So I'm from Florida though, and I understand how school districts in other states are part of the county. We're so darn large that my district and most districts are probably larger than counties in other places. And because I'm in San Bernardino County, which is like the largest county in the US, this size of money would not be, they wouldn't be interested because it is so small for them. Whereas for me, being a person who deals with 2 rural adult schools in very rural communities, that's why I asked.
We'll definitely look at we will send you all an email. We will send you all via email an announcement when the RFP goes live with a registration link for the webinar in April. So you can review the RFP, get your questions together, review the FAQs, get your questions together. She'll have that. So definitely review that to get your questions. So Shelby, the RFP is not yet out. It'll be out in April. One last question for Crystal, who raised her hand. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm coming at this sideways. I didn't really attend because we're interested in the grant. We work at an area agency on aging and are looking at opportunities to partner with senior centers, much like public libraries. They are very much a hub for folks who need skills or information and resources, and working with trying to develop tech training. And I was introduced to this concept about digital inclusion and digital equity. And we're trying to build some of this language into our grant opportunities to help senior centers build something like this specifically for the niche of older adults. And so I'm still trying to wrap my head around, I'm very much that social services model. So I'm still wrapping my head around this digital navigator piece. I get that you guys don't need someone to be a digital navigator. It doesn't need to be someone who is a highly experienced IT professional, but more someone who's social services. What I need to know is what training that social services or community person needs to make them the digital navigator. Are you guys like a central agency that's helping develop what that means, or curriculum or training? I guess I'm trying to figure out what that person needs if they're already a community organization to get them to be a digital navigator. And that was a very long-winded question.
Yeah, I can take that. And then Christy, Abby, feel free to fill in like what goes into this, and especially like for folks who are, you know, coming to digital inclusion and digital navigator for the first time. Like one of the things that we are really emphasizing with this program is for the digital navigator to become that local digital inclusion expert within their community. So like all of us learning here now exactly like what digital inclusion is, what digital equity is. A digital navigator is that person who is able to advocate locally for those better services and to get connected with local decision makers, policy makers, to be able to express that there is a need for this program, and over the course of the 31 months of direct service to show that this is the sort of impact that digital inclusion programming can and should have on community members. So whether that's being able to track, you know, like if X amount of people were able to get connected with a job as a result of this program, right? Like those sort of hard outcomes that we like, that, you know, funders like to see as a result of programming like this. That's what this program gives us an opportunity to do, because it is so long and because it does take place over such a like longitudinal amount of time. So so to your question earlier, Crystal, right? Like what NDIA provides is that training. we like the training slide where I was describing what the orientation is and how to upskill. NDIA provides that training, but we don't stop there, right? NDIA will be with you and the organization and the digital navigator throughout that 31 months of direct service, and also buffer time on both sides to make sure that your organizations and your digital navigators are best equipped with what is happening on the ground, right? If whether that means that there's like new federal legislation that they should be aware of, or more policy that they should be aware of, or even just connecting with folks locally to learn about more best practices. And one more component, and then I'll stop, is that what we didn't really dig into today is that there are already, in our wonderful and huge and growing community, there are already several digital equity leaders spread throughout the country, right? Like I'm thinking of a few in Arizona, California, Detroit, right? Part of this Digital Navigator program is to build a sort of mentorship pipeline to get digital navigators connected with those, not only with us, NDIA, but get connected with people who are more regionally local. So we'll be able to convene, hopefully, fingers crossed, in-person meetings over the course of this direct service process.
And one other thing I just want to add to, and I think we're coming up on time, is separate from the National Digital Navigator Corps, NDIA does provide the ability for you all to contract with NDIA to do digital navigator programs, to set it up, to receive the training, to receive ongoing support for a 1-year term. So that's something, if you're interested, feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat. And we do have some of our partners who have done that, are doing that right now on the call with us today. Okay, so with that, I think we're going to wrap it up to give you some more time to your day. Definitely email us with more questions and be on the lookout for an email to come to you next month, again, about the RFP being live, as well as more FAQs, as well as an invite for the webinar that will happen in April, so you can ask more detailed questions once the RFP is up and out. Thank you for giving us so much of your time this afternoon. Paulo, Abby, anything else before people hop off?
Can I ask a question? If you have a minute. So what's the benefit of being an affiliate versus